I first would like to suggest a few corrections in the way item number 9 is written and appears. One of which is the misstatement of the name of the commission in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 line where it says City of Moscow Health and Environment, because we haven't been that for a few years.
It says SEC for the short.
It says SEC, but that obviously is an abbreviation for HEC. So, the item at the bottom said, the last sentence at the bottom starts at the May 16th, 2011 meeting. Council was again informed SEC would be holding meetings to review the issue of environmental impacts of oil extraction. We did not state that that was the purpose of the meeting. We put no sideboards on the meeting. We let anybody who came to the meeting talk about anything they wanted, but we did not limit it simply to issues that had to directly pertain to Moscow.
So, Scott, do you have specific language to suggest from if we can have just note a correction to that?
Well, SEC would be holding meetings to review, to again, allow public input on the megaload issue as a summary, as I would put it, as simple as that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do other than, since we've delivered the letter, and I know that the action is to respond to the letter, but I thought so I said, I think the letter is pretty self-explanatory in terms of summarizing the reasons for our request that are at the end of the letter. But I'll provide a few additional points of rationale. First, the SEC would suggest that most Moscow residents would not desire Highway 95 through town to be more heavily used by large industrial transport. So this is obviously related to the oversized loads coming through town, but SEC feels that even the Moscow residents who are not interested in necessarily trying to avert to continued operation at tar sands might be and are concerned about the likely potential increase in industrial transport, especially over legal-sized loads coming through town. So a welcoming attitude by City Council sends a message to the Idaho Department of Transportation, the Transportation Department, that Moscow is unconcerned about such an increase coming through the city. Secondly, although the majority of City Council members did not agree with a large proportion of negative comments concerning the ITD proposal, the SEC feels it's inappropriate to issue a statement that in no way recognized the legitimate concerns raised by the large majority of citizens who took the time to make their concerns known in the 2 organized meetings on the megaload issue, the first at the Hamilton Rec Center and the second the meeting held by SEC. The Council statement did not contain so much as a question about the operation and the future of this operation. None of the concerns from the Moscow citizens were addressed in any manner, despite the dominance of their voice at all opportunities to be heard. And finally, though the city has at least 3 volunteer commissions which have been established to provide advice and recommendations on matters related to issues like megaloads coming through town, specifically Transportation Commission, the Tree Commission, and the Sustainable Environment Commission, none of these advisory bodies were consulted prior to City Council issuing its opinion on this issue. By issuing their opinion in the manner that they did, City Council behaved in a manner that serves to discourage future citizen involvement in the operation of city government. So with that, I'll be glad to take any questions about the letter or any specific points in the letter or the request that we made.
Thank you, Scott. Council members have questions for Scott or others of the Sustainable Environment Commission. So the actions requested here in your letter, would you like to enumerate those?
Yeah, the four actions were to, 1, represent all the city's constituents and rescind its earlier position statement that welcomes and encourages the megaloads to move through Moscow. Number 2, formally request from ITD, should be ITD, not ATD, more complete information about the process and liabilities inherent in this current project, such as things like who's going to pay for the overtime for the police. Request information from ITD concerning knowledge and plans for increased use of US 95 as an industrial corridor through the area. And then 4, issue a new position statement that reflects the concerns, desires, and sustainable efforts of the City of Moscow and its citizens.
Thank you. As everybody here probably knows, the first general public meeting that we held back in May at the Hamilton Indoor Recreation Center had the sideboards. We are talking about transportation, economic development considerations within this corridor that is Highway 95 through Moscow, Washington Street northbound, Jackson Street southbound. And that was because that was the scope of action by the Idaho Transportation Department and the Idaho State Police, who were there with ExxonMobil representatives to talk about those particular aspects. Per the mission of the Sustainable Environment Commission, that discussion was more generally about environmental aspects of this hauling. There's been considerable public input on this. The council and I have received oral comments, emails, letters, the testimony from folks who deviated a bit from the sideboards of that first meeting. I think it's important. It's a very controversial topic, but it is a meaningful one. And this city council has indicated on some occasions that because Alberta bituminous sands are outside the city's jurisdiction, it ought not matter to us. Those of you who've heard me speak on the subject know that I think otherwise, but it's clearly the council's discretion as to whether to rescind its previous position statement and to request additional information from the Idaho Transportation Department per the recommendation of our Sustainable Environment Commission with the input of members of the public who came and provided their testimony. And so I would implore the council to consider these this reasoning seriously and to make a statement about it. I know that this is, I'm not soliciting public input tonight. We've given a number of opportunities for testimony before the Sustainable Environment Commission. We've received communication. There have been many letters to the editor about this topic. Scott, I want to make sure that we haven't left anything out from your fellow commissioners. If you, everybody's okay with that?
We're good?
Okay.
Yeah, we've got 4 of them there.
Okay. City Council, what do you say?
Madam Mayor,
Dan?
if we're this concerned about environmental damage being caused by this oil sands project in Canada, so concerned that the folks think that the council should take a position against oversized loads that have been and may be future permitted on US 95, perhaps we should look at another potential environmental disaster. I've been noticing far more hybrid cars in the city of Moscow, most notably a certain car that rhymes with Shmoyota Shmrius. The resources needed for the batteries in these vehicles has to be extracted from the earth, and from the pictures what I've seen of this, it leaves behind a desolate wasteland. So should we then have a meeting about whether we should allow these vehicles in the city of Moscow because it makes us compliant with such environmental disaster potential? Are we sending the wrong message by allowing these in town? Should we be picketing signs with skulls showing skulls and crossbones used in place of the company logo that rhymes with Shmoyota? Should we allow protesters to stop traffic for a half an hour, letting the drivers of these vehicles know that we don't support the environmental disaster their choice of vehicle represents? And perhaps we should ask the Sustainable Environment Commission to study this situation as well, to make sure we know what we're dealing with. I mean, really, it sounds a little absurd, but you can't have your cake and eat it too. You're not only looking at the extraction of the equipment used to make these vehicles, but also the potential disposal of these vehicles in the future. And what are we going to do with that? So where do you draw the line? That's what I want to know.
Thanks, Dan. I think those are excellent questions. And tomorrow morning, I'm going to a National League of Cities Energy, Environment, and Natural Resources Steering Committee meeting, and actually that topic about electric vehicles and hybrid electrics and their batteries, our group toured an electric vehicle manufacturing facility, and we actually are looking at those issues about extraction of the heavy metals pertaining to batteries and where they go, how they're recycled, how they're disposed of in that way. So
And Madam Mayor, if I could respond,
I agree.
I think this is analogous in many ways to the issue that we asked Moscow Recycling to take another look at in terms of what happens to the city's electronic waste,
Exactly.
because it's a disposal issue, just as you cited, no doubt about it.
Absolutely, yeah. Other comments or discussion? Would the council care to respond as this is an action item this evening? Tom?
Well, I think that the points that the Sustainable Environment Commission made are very helpful for the city of Moscow to consider. I would like to have seen the council not take its stand before having been able to consider some of these items. Before the megaload issue started appearing to consider using Highway 95, I had tried to get the Moscow City Council to look at the issue of the megaloads with respect to the Idaho taxpayer and the use of these loads going through Idaho. But that was back when it was on Highway 12, and it was considered, I think, at that time of no consequence to the city, so I wasn't able to get it on any agendas. Subsequent to that attempt, there was a decision to start bringing the loads through on Highway 95, and then we started to see it as more of an issue for the city of Moscow. Clearly, given the level of protest that we've seen for the loads, there's a lot of interest for us in the city to continue to have discussions and considerations of these loads. And I think it would behoove the city to consider some of these issues. I would particularly like to see the city or the state of Idaho address questions of the cost of the loads versus the amount of money that is being raised for the loads through the permit process. I understand that we as a city are going to start looking at the issue of the cost to police escorts through the city of Moscow next week. So I think that there's an opportunity at the Administrative Commission to take a look at several of these issues simultaneously. So perhaps we should send this letter along with some of the other issues that we're looking at, the issue of the cost of the loads to Idaho taxpayers, the issue of the cost of police coverage for load escort through the city to the Administrative Committee so that we can kind of tick off these issues and consider them all.
Wayne?
The four requests from the SEC, the second and third one, formally request from ITD more complete information about the process and liabilities inherent in this current project, and to request information from ITD concerning knowledge and plans for increased use of US 95 as an industrial corridor through the area, I think are very reasonable. I don't think that I agree with a lot of what you said, Tom. I think that the permitting process of these large loads should be predicated upon the weight of the vehicle, and we probably should be getting more money for these. I think that's definitely something to look at. Obviously, that's something that has to be looked at the state level. If we wanted to send a letter, I wouldn't be opposed to that at all. The first one from the SEC, however, says represent all of the city's constituents. That's kind of like trying to keep all the people happy all the time. And if there's one thing I've learned, that doesn't happen. I don't know what type of a statement that could be made that could represent all of the city's constituents other than a benign statement like was already made. In the last few weeks, it's been commented that the council has actually welcomed these loads, and that wasn't the purpose of the statement. The statement was a benign statement saying we can see no structural reason why. So my question goes back to how do you represent all the city's constituents in a statement? But the second and third ones, I think, definitely would be worthwhile to look at.
Sue?
When we had this vote on this motion before, which stated that we could see no structure, we could see no evidence of structural damage, and therefore, and we hoped that the employees would spend money here, that didn't say that we welcomed the megaloads. At that time, one of the reasons why I abstained is that we didn't have information on both sides, and I agree with you, Wayne, and I agree with you, Tom, that we need all that information. And it had been brought up as comments in this letter that Highway 95 may become an industrial corridor. Is that what we want for our community? And I would say yes, because that's what Highway 95 is. We had Main Street with the chip trucks taken off of it, so it wouldn't affect the character of our community. But we have a Highway 95, which is the road from Canada to Mexico, and yes, we do want an industrial corridor. However, megaloads, Scott, as you said in your quotes from the state, that these large shipments were for the purpose of, taking logs from the forest and agricultural machinery and those kinds of things. And so this is another animal altogether, and we don't get the money. The state gets the money because the state maintains the highway because it's a state highway, but the state should get more money for this. I think part of the reason why I didn't take a stand on oil sands is that it's not in the city's jurisdiction. We could yell and scream all we wanted, but we have nothing to say about it. I think the comments and the protests should go to the people who can make those decisions, one of them being our beloved governor, who basically gave us carte blanche before anybody even knew about it. And the tar sands, that's at the federal level, that's not at the level of the city council. And one of the things that I'm really careful about is that we have a certain amount of political capital, and we have to really focus our energy and our clout on things where we can actually change something. And I don't think we can change the tar sands by being in the street. We can make them pay for the street. We can make the state say, this is not something that should be every day. This is not something that we should be using this for through our towns and on the loads this big. But I don't think it's our jurisdiction to talk about the oil sands.
Thank you, Sue. I'll just expend a little bit of political capital here by saying that at some point, each of us has to take a position. We breathe the air. Our food crops are dependent on the climate. If there's even just a tiny particle of doubt in anybody's mind that, gee, maybe these abnormal or unusual weather conditions, these extreme weather conditions could possibly, in our wildest dreams, be related to our exploitation of the fossil fuels.
The council level doesn't have any power over that.
But I think everything we do, our city budget is related to this as it relates to our adaptation to climate change. If we don't have sufficient quantities of clean air, clean water, or we can't grow our foodstuffs, we're not going to be able to import them from far, far away indefinitely. So I do think that, recognizing maybe it's just a very broad statement, not a policy statement, not anything, but it's just sort of this world awareness statement saying we are all interconnected in some way, and it's not our place as local officials to not care what our impacts are. We've tried with the Eco Driver program, with our weatherization programs for city buildings, with our bicycle program, with the plastic bag encouragement kind of process that Sustainable Environment Commission has worked on. Many aspects of what the city is doing, the greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets, we found that was economically a very good idea for us because we could save a lot of money in traffic signal retrofits. But, looking at all these interconnected pieces, I think, is our responsibility. The local level affects the state level, affects the federal level, affects the international level, and affects the global environment as well as the politics of this place. So how would the council like to respond to the recommendations from the Sustainable Environment Commission? Tim?
Thank you, Mayor Cheney. I'll move that we accept the letter from the Sustainable Environment Commission.
Second.
Okay. Discussion?
Oh, and I appreciate all the work that's put into it and all of the thought.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Tom?
Madam Mayor, after we vote on this motion, I would like to continue to discuss this issue.
Okay, that's acceptable to me. So Walter, we'll start the roll call vote with you.
Aye.
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 Aye.